What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is the LazyDaze channel and we're back at it again with some more history reaction for you guys today. And today we have some TimeGhost History, a new series and a new content creator. We're doing their series, the Cuban Missile Crisis, day to day. We're really looking forward to it. In this episode we have US starts the atomic arms race, the Cuban Missile Crisis Part 1. Prelude. We're really looking forward to finding out some more about this history and some more to do with the Cold War era, and just finding out some more information. If you haven't already, head over to TimeGhost Channel. A link will be in the description box down below. If you guys are enjoying our content, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we will just jump into this one.
Let's do this.
In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brings the world one launch code away from full-on nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States. This documentary series will cover that crisis one day at a time. But first, we're releasing two preludes to the crisis to set the stage.
So it's the same
Here comes
guy
part
from
one.
Sabotage History, isn't it?
This is TimeGhost, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm Indy Nidell. Never before and never since has that possibility of our world being suddenly destroyed been so close.
I was
In
really
the
confused with what
58
the cat
years
in the
since it
background
happened,
was for
the
a
Cuban
second there.
Missile Crisis and its aftermath has been analyzed in books, dissertations, fictional films, and documentaries. But as more of the actual source documents have been made public over the past 25 years, the story looks significantly different from both sides' original official versions. To understand the crisis, we first have to
indeed.
look at where the two
Indeed.
superpowers stand in
Indeed.
1962. The capitalist and communist systems have been in opposition from the day the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia after the 1917 revolutions. The Soviets see the capitalist system as a scourge of humanity that needs to be eliminated. On the American side, the communist system is seen as a direct threat to the American way of life.
We believe in freedom. Freedom for these people, for ourselves, for everyone. We want freedom, not tyranny.
The persecution of communists in the States during the Cold War and McCarthyism are well known, but this started already in the 1920s with the Red Scare, when thousands of American communists were prosecuted and incarcerated and even exiled for their political beliefs. The hatchet was briefly buried when the two became allies against Germany in the Second World War, but it was dug up as that war ended, and in 1962, it is unclear which ideology will prevail.
It is total competition with an antagonist who is putting into it everything within his capability. It is not a conflict between peoples, but between basic values and systems of government.
The Western world, led by the US, is establishing a system of more or less free trade and alliances based on independence, inclusion, and personal freedom.
course.
The goal is peace and prosperity.
I'm John Wayne. Is there any better or equal hope in the world, Lincoln asked, than the ultimate justice of the people? We Americans believe there is
My
not.
man's smoking a fag on
The
TV.
stonework of our
It's
national
probably
life is
cigar.
made of this
Yeah.
belief. We believe
Nice
in many
cigarette.
things, but this belief that man is a responsible being bears out our own unique stamp as a nation. As a people, we are active and often noisy. We are industrious, oftentimes to the bafflement of ourselves and our friends.
The communist world, led by the Soviet Union, though initially in cooperation with China, is developing a system of planned economy and regulated trade that depends on expanding the communist system to client states under Soviet or Chinese control. The goal is peace and prosperity.
We must create a whole new generation of mechanics, Stalin said. In 1928, the first of a series of large-scale 5-year plans was begun. And by 1940, Russia was far different from the land of the Tsars.
As World War II ended, many of the Central and Eastern European countries that had been invaded by Germany and then liberated by the Red Army fell under Soviet control. The Soviets also kept control of East Germany when Germany was split into East and West. But this was only the beginning of Soviet expansion. Under communist doctrine, the Soviet Union theoretically, strives for a world without borders, controlled by the dictatorship of the proletariat. To achieve this, it seeds and supports communist revolutions wherever possible. This is a direct threat to the democratic principles of much of the Western world. So the U.S. began a policy of global containment, supporting and financing anti-communist movements in Europe, in former European, African, and Asian colonies, and in Latin America. This is an expansion of the Monroe Doctrine from the 1800s, named after President James Monroe, which says that any European colonialism in the Americas will be actively opposed by the United States. The American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. We could not view any interposition for the purpose of oppressing them or controlling in any other manner their destiny by any European power in any other light than as the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition towards the United States.
Okay.
The U.S. has started to apply the spirit of the Monroe Doctrine to the entire world, though its direct application within the Americas will prove critical to the events leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis and the crisis itself. This web of principles and theories brings the two superpowers into direct conflict all over the world and provides the basis on which the Cold War will be fought. It leads to a long series of proxy wars, covert operations of influence, and the fanning of regional conflicts to further the interests of each side. In early 1948, the first major confrontations arise when the democracy in Czechoslovakia is overthrown in a Soviet-backed communist state, and the Western Allies introduced the new Deutschmark as the currency in Berlin. Berlin at the time is divided into 4 zones of military control between France, Great Britain, the U.S., and the Soviets. But the city is still governed as one unit by local powers, right? The introduction of a new currency is a direct threat to Soviet economic control over the city. Up to then, President Harry Truman and the U.S. had not decided what to do with Berlin. They weren't even sure if they would keep armed forces within the city. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, though, had decided his gang would keep control over all of East Germany, including Berlin, and milk it for as many resources as possible. They had, in fact, managed to turn their zone's population against them by plundering industrial resources, forcibly deporting workers, and even transporting whole factories to Russian territory. France and Great Britain, for their part, are staunchly opposed to a Soviet Berlin to pressure the U.S. to hold out against the Russians, and officially, everyone is striving for a reunited Germany with Berlin as its capital. In an attempt to stop the Deutschmark, Stalin orders a full blockade of the city so that no food, materials, or supplies can be brought in. The Allies respond by creating an air bridge into the city, flying in enough food and materials to keep the city alive. The Berlin airlift eventually brings in so many supplies that Stalin gives up, and the blockade is practically over by May 1949, though officially it's lifted in September. But both sides move to assert their control over Germany. First, the Federal Republic of Germany is created as a democratic state on May 5th, 1949. Then, on October 7th, the SED, the East German Communist Party, proclaims the German Democratic Republic, which, despite its name, is a satellite state to the Soviet Union.
Okay.
With all of this, the threat that the Soviet Union is to the West is now tangible and immediate. It brings the Western Allies closer together, and they create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, as a bulwark against Soviet expansion. A similar situation to Germany also exists in Korea. After being liberated from Japan during World War II, Korea has been split into the north under Soviet control and the south under US control, both claiming sovereignty over each other's territory. The attempt to create 2 independent states fails in 1950 when the north invades the south and the Korean War breaks out. While the Soviets and Chinese back the north, a large part of the rest of the world unites in defense of the south in a combined intervention under the United Nations flag. Ostensibly, the war is between an independent north and a UN-backed south. In reality, China and the Soviet Union give extensive support to the north, and 88% of the UN forces for the south are from the United States. The war even actually sees direct battle between Russians and Americans as Soviet airmen fight their US Air Force counterparts in the Korean skies. 3 years of bloody war end with a divided Korea along the line of the DMZ. Not too different from the Strait Division along the 38th parallel where they began in 1950. Meanwhile, in Europe, the conflict around West and East Germany continues to escalate. In 1952, the Soviet Union proposes the reunification of Germany as a free democratic state on the condition that the new Germany would remain neutral and not be allowed to join NATO. West Germany refuses, fearing that the Soviets will not stick to their promises of allowing the new country independence. To what extent the proposal actually comes from the Soviets, or is a real East German initiative, and if so, a missed opportunity for genuine reunification, is still an issue of debate. After Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet Union proposes that it too should join NATO to preserve peace in Europe. The US and Britain reject this, seeing it as an attempt to stop the buildup of NATO forces in Europe. Instead, they move to include West Germany in NATO. The Soviet reaction is to form the Warsaw Pact in 1955. This effectively joins the Soviet Union and 7 Central and Eastern European satellite states into a single cohesive military force. On paper, the two blocs are now in a balance of power state, but only if you don't consider the nuclear arms race. The Soviets had already begun developing nuclear arms during World War II, but it would take until 1949 for them to develop a functional atom bomb to test. The US is well aware of Soviet efforts, and in response increases its nuclear program from an estimated 13 warheads in 1947 to 2,422 by 1955. In the same time frame, the Soviets are able to increase their arsenal to 200. The US is clearly ahead. By the time John F. Kennedy is inaugurated as president in 1961, the US has an estimated 22,229 operational warheads, while the Soviets possess just 2,492. Furthermore, the deployment systems of the US are so much more advanced that the Soviets have no realistic chance of launching a first strike that would lead to anything other than immediate self-destruction. JFK knows this. The by now sole leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, knows this. The military commanders on both sides know this. The KGB knows this, the CIA knows this, but the American and Soviet public do not know this. This will prove crucial in the crisis to come. Meanwhile, in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Europe, the dance of revolutionary and counter-revolutionary actions goes on. 4 of these hotspots will become critical for Kennedy: Berlin, Vietnam, Laos, and Cuba. Okay, the developments in Southeast Asia in the 1950s lead to the domino theory, formulated by President Dwight Eisenhower in 1954. This theory states that if one country in a region is allowed to fall to communism, then the rest will swiftly follow. The Laotian Civil War is a proxy war that neither the Soviets nor the US are really keen on fighting, but still have to stay engaged in. That war breaks out in 1953, but will soon spill into the Vietnam War, which begins 2 years later, which in turn will partly reignite the Korean War, and it looks more and more like the domino theory is correct. So after New Year's 1959, when Fidel Castro rather unexpectedly succeeds with the Cuban Revolution, the US thinks it has all the reason in the world to fear a communist surge in its own backyard, and that it needs to be stopped as swiftly as possible. I should point out here that the Western powers under US leadership have more money than the Soviet Union, more resources, and outpower it in nuclear arms by a factor of 10. And yet, both sides are capable of destroying the world. And now, here we stand, as the 1960s are about to begin, with them facing each other ever more warily, over a world ever more divided in two, and that world will very soon be on the brink of nuclear holocaust. I mentioned Stalin's death, but if you want to see his rise to power, you can click here for our Between Two Wars episode about that. You can also click subscribe to never miss an episode. Definitely be interested to see about Stalin's rise. If you guys want us to react to that, definitely let us know in the comments box down below. I actually really enjoyed this. It was just like a just giving you a bit of information into what's going to be happening. So I'm definitely looking forward to finding out what happens.
23,000 warheads, mate.
Mate, that's outrageous, isn't it? Like, I can't
That's a
believe
bit too much. What?
No.
Nah.
Insane. Well, we have definitely got more to come. If you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we will catch you in the next video.
See you in a bit.